When both you and the person with narcissistic traits fall silent, the world doesn't just quiet down. It blows up because in that moment, someone finally loses authority and it's not you. Most people think mutual silence means the chapter is closed, but the truth is far more unsettling. This is when the person with narcissistic traits begins their deep mental breakdown and when your recovery truly starts. Stick with me because what happens next is the part no one prepares you for. If this is already feeling too personal, stay focused. You need to grasp the mental landscape you're stepping onto because understanding this is how you stop the pattern forever. Let's look closer. When both you and the person with narcissistic traits stop reaching out, the very first thing that happens on their side is what I call the reset stage. It's subtle, it's mental, and it's something most people don't notice because it happens quietly behind the scenes, long before the person with narcissistic traits ever makes a move. When you become quiet, you see it as an emotional change, a limit, a step towards getting better. But the person with narcissistic traits doesn't see your quietness that way. They treat it as information. Your lack of reply becomes something they must figure out, not something they respect. They begin to judge how they lost their grip, not how they hurt you. People with narcissistic traits do not reflect on themselves the way healthy people do. Instead, they examine things. Did you get sidetracked? Are you punishing them? Did someone new appear? Are you testing them? They look for the angle, the reason, the possible danger. Your quietness becomes a puzzle they need to solve because uncertainty destabilizes them. During this reset stage, they may not contact you at all. In fact, their quietness is not indifference, it's a plan. They might watch your online activity, check your social contacts, or observe who is talking to you. They're collecting details, waiting for your next emotional action. People with narcissistic traits believe that people they once influenced will always come back, so your quietness is not seen as closure. It is seen as short-term resistance. This is why they do not panic right away. Instead, they hold back, assuming you will break the silence first, the same way you have in the past. They rely on the habits they created in you, the guilt, the fear of conflict, the hope for peace. They expect you to give in. When you don't, their reset becomes more focused. They begin to wonder whether their influence is fading, and that is when the danger becomes real to them. Quietness in their world is never unimportant. It is either a chance to take back control or a threat to their ego. And the longer you stay quiet, the more they feel the situation change beneath them because your quietness ruins the power dynamic they relied on. When both sides become quiet, the emotional experience is drastically different for you than it is for the person with narcissistic traits. And this difference reveals a difficult truth. You feel the sorrow, but they feel the inconvenience. When you stop reaching out, you're often carrying the full weight of what happened. You're sorting through the emotional damage, the broken trust, the unanswered questions, and the mental exhaustion. You may feel sadness, withdrawal, confusion, or even guilt. You're mourning not just the relationship, but the version of yourself that put up with so much. Your quietness comes from emotional overload. You've reached a point where your mind and body cannot handle more disorder. You're trying to take back space, self-respect, and clear thinking. That inner battle is heavy and it affects your sleep, your self-esteem, your memories, and your sense of identity. Meanwhile, the person with narcissistic traits doesn't see the quietness through deep emotion. They don't sit with the loss the way you do. They don't think about what went wrong or how they hurt you or what needs to change. Instead, their first reaction is based on inconvenience. Your quietness messes up their routine, not their heart. They're used to having access to your attention, your reactions, your apologies, your care, even your arguments. All of it fed their sense of importance. When you go quiet, that flow of confirmation suddenly stops. This doesn't break them emotionally. It simply annoys them. They feel the lack of supply the way someone feels losing access to a service they've relied on. It's a disruption, a delay, a frustration. They aren't thinking, I lost someone important. They're thinking, why aren't they replying? Your pain and their inconvenience exist in two separate mental worlds. You're grieving the relationship while they're checking their access. You're trying to rebuild yourself while they're calculating how your quietness affects their ego. You feel the emptiness. They feel the interruption. And as time passes, this difference becomes even clearer. You slowly begin to realize how heavy the emotional burden truly was and how much of yourself you silenced to keep the peace. They begin to wonder why something that used to work so easily, your emotional responsiveness, suddenly isn't working. The difference becomes clear. Your quietness forces you deeper into self-examination and recovery, while it forces them into annoyance and a feeling of entitlement. The emotional weight you carry is intense, while the discomfort they feel is tied not to losing you, but to losing the ease of your obedience. When both sides go quiet, the person with narcissistic traits does not see that quietness as a break or a mutual step back. They see it as a direct attack on their ego, because quietness from someone they once influenced feels like rebellion. The person with narcissistic traits sees relationships through a filter of control, not mutual respect. So when you no longer respond, no longer reach out, and no longer give them attention, it ruins the mental ranking they believe they created. They see your quietness as an act of defiance, even if your goal was simply to protect your peace or regain emotional clarity. In their mind, quietness is never neutral. It's an insult, it's resistance, it's proof that their influence may be fading. This is why quietness affects them more deeply than any argument. Arguments give them importance. Reactivity gives them strength. Even anger confirms their belief that they still matter in your emotional world. But quietness removes them from the center of attention. And that removal threatens the delicate story they rely on. Your quietness forces them to confront the possibility that they are not as necessary, desirable, or dominant as they thought. People with narcissistic traits cannot handle vagueness, and your lack of communication creates exactly that, a space they cannot control or understand. Instead of seeing your quietness as a healthy limit, they see it as a provocation. This is when their inner thoughts become twisted. They may tell themselves you're being disrespectful, ungrateful, or manipulative. They may see your distance as a game, assuming you're trying to force a reaction from them. Their ego leads them to believe that your quietness is a tactic, not a sign of exhaustion or self-protection. Some people with narcissistic traits will mentally shift to a competitive mindset, seeing the quietness as a battle of wills they must win. Others will frame it as betrayal, convincing themselves you abandoned them. Even though they may have treated you badly for months or years, they change the meaning of your quietness to protect their self-image, not to understand your experience. As this mental tension builds, the person with narcissistic traits' sense of control begins to shake. Your quietness becomes a mirror reflecting their own insecurity. And rather than sitting with that discomfort, they begin creating stories that restore their superiority. They may assume you'll eventually give in because you always have, or they may start planning ways to punish you emotionally for not behaving according to their script. In their world, quietness threatens their ego because it suggests something they cannot accept. You may no longer be under their mental influence. When both sides stop reaching out, something very different happens internally for the person with narcissistic traits than for you. For you, the quietness may feel like room to breathe, space to process, space to finally understand what you endured. But for the person with narcissistic traits, your absence creates a kind of mental hole that forces them to confront something they spend their entire lives avoiding, the loss of control. They don't think in terms of mutual distance or mutual limits. Instead, they see your disengagement as a break in the system they built to maintain their identity. People with narcissistic traits do not operate from an inner sense of worth. Their self-esteem is built externally, held together by the reactions, attention, and confirmation of the people around them. You were part of that system. Your emotions, your replies, your habit of returning after conflict, all of that confirmed their sense of superiority and influence. When you go quiet, you stop that cycle, and that interruption forces them into a moment of mental exposure. It confronts them with their dependence on your involvement, something they don't want to admit even to themselves. They built a story where they were the dominant one, the one in control, the one giving the orders. Your quietness challenges that story. It signals that you may have stepped out of the role they gave you, and this destabilizes their carefully managed identity. Without your reactions, they have nothing to push against, nothing to manipulate, nothing to use as proof of their power. This absence becomes a threat not because they care about the relationship in a meaningful or emotionally mature way, but because it disrupts the foundation of control that allowed them to feel important. This is the moment when their inner state becomes restless. They may begin replaying old talks, searching for signs they missed. They may wonder if someone else has taken their place. They may start looking for ways to take back control, even if they still haven't contacted you. The quietness becomes louder for them than it does for you because they don't know what's happening on your side. That lack of clear information robs them of the illusion that they can predict your behavior. They are suddenly outside of your world, not at the center of it. And that loss of centrality is mentally unbearable for them. Their mind shifts from arrogance to anxiety, from entitlement to suspicion, from certainty to instability. And all of it is triggered by something as simple as your absence. When both you and the person with narcissistic traits step back into quiet, it may seem from the outside like nothing is happening. But internally, the person with narcissistic traits begins moving through a predictable series of behaviors designed to restore their sense of control. One of the most common reactions is their attempt to fill the void your absence created through hoovering, baiting, or triangulation. These tactics aren't random. They're mental tools the person with narcissistic traits uses when they feel their influence fading. Hoovering happens when they realize your quietness isn't temporary. At first, they assume you'll return because that's what they've trained you to do. When you don't, the panic starts. Hoovering is their attempt to pull you back into the cycle, not because they value you emotionally, but because losing you threatens their ego stability. They may send a gentle message, a nostalgic memory, or a crisis-focused plea. They may seem sorry, thoughtful, or unusually caring. They change their tone to whatever they think will work because the goal isn't reconnecting, it's reinstating control. If hoovering fails or feels too exposed for them, they shift to baiting. Baiting is designed to force an emotional reaction from you, whether positive or negative. People with narcissistic traits don't care which direction your emotions go. They care about being the cause. They might post something online aimed at making you jealous, send a sharp or dismissive message to get you angry, or create unnecessary drama that forces you to respond. Any reaction, even a negative one, restores their sense of importance. Quietness strips them of power, so baiting becomes their way of poking the injury they created, hoping you'll hurt just enough to remind them you're still available. When those plans don't work, they increase the tactic to triangulation. This is where they bring in someone else, an ex, a new partner, a friend, a family member, not for genuine connection, but to create a story that puts them back in control. They might show off a new relationship, hint that someone else appreciates them more, or exaggerate your quietness to appear like the victim. The entire point of triangulation is to make you feel replaced, insecure, or easily substituted. It's meant to lure you back into defending your worth or reestablishing your place in their life. These behaviors aren't proof of love, they're proof of dependence. The person with narcissistic traits relies on outside supply to maintain a sense of identity, and when you withdraw that supply, they desperately try to fix the gap. Hoovering, baiting, and triangulation are their attempts to regain mental dominance, not emotional closeness. Their reactions are born from fear, entitlement, and ego disruption, all triggered by your silence. When the quietness continues on both sides, something profound begins to happen that most people don't expect. While you may see the quiet as a step towards peace or final closure, the person with narcissistic traits experiences it as a growing sense of worry. Your quietness is not seen as calm, it's seen as a loss of control. And because their identity is so heavily dependent on the reactions of others, especially people they once drew into their world, the absence of your reply triggers a kind of inner alarm. What becomes important here is understanding that your quiet is not their peace, it's their panic. People with narcissistic traits rely on emotional stimulation from others to maintain the fragile structure of their self-esteem. They need attention, praise, conflict, drama, anything that places them at the center of someone else's emotional world. When you stop supplying that energy, they feel an internal collapse beginning. They don't know how to stabilize themselves without outside feedback, and your quietness deprives them of that feedback. This creates a mental chain reaction. At first, they may try to dismiss your quietness, pretending it doesn't matter. They may act unbothered, detached, or even relieved, but this is a protective facade. As time passes, the quiet becomes harder for them to ignore. Without your attention holding up their inflated self-image, they start to feel unimportant, overlooked, and irrelevant. These feelings are unbearable for them because they strike at the core of their biggest fear, being ordinary, invisible, or unimportant. While you may be using the quietness to gather strength or rebuild your sense of self, they experience the same quietness as an emotional hole that threatens their entire identity. Your nervous system begins to calm down without the constant tension or unpredictability they brought into your life. The confusion disappears. You start to recognize your worth and take back parts of yourself that were suppressed. You find clear thinking in the quiet while they find chaos. This contrast becomes even more visible the longer the quietness continues. They might begin overthinking, replaying interactions, imagining scenarios, or inventing reasons why you're no longer engaging. The uncertainty stresses them. They don't miss the relationship. They miss the reflection of themselves they used to see in your reactions. And so while your quietness is healing, theirs is destabilizing. You find pieces of yourself returning. They feel pieces of their constructed identity slipping. What feels peaceful and necessary for you becomes stressful and threatening for them. This difference in experience is what ultimately shows the imbalance that existed all along, showing you that the quiet sets you free while it slowly takes them apart internally. When the quietness settles on both sides, something begins to shift inside you in a way that often feels slow, confusing, and strangely comforting all at once. Your nervous system, which has been living in a state of constant alarm throughout the relationship, finally gets a chance to stop preparing for the next emotional blow. Narcissistic relationships create a long-term state of extreme alertness. You learn to predict their moods, their reactions, their unpredictable emotional state. Your body becomes trained to expect tension even in calm moments. So when the quietness begins, your system doesn't instantly relax. At first, it doesn't know how. You may feel stressed, restless, or uncomfortable with the quiet. You may see the lack of conflict as something being wrong. That response is not weakness. It's biology. Your body has been trained to operate in survival mode. But as time passes, the confusion starts to lift. Your mind slowly detaches itself from the disorder. You begin noticing how your thoughts change when you're not constantly expecting their next outburst or manipulation. Your sleep improves. You start feeling moments of inner peace that you haven't felt in years. This is your nervous system resetting. It's recognizing that the danger has lessened. This is the start of true healing, the kind that doesn't require permission, apology, or closure from them. This is the moment when you start taking back emotional capacity that was once entirely consumed by their needs, demands, and crises. You rediscover your ability to think clearly, to feel your own emotions without someone else manipulating or undermining them, and to make choices based on your own values instead of being overly cautious.